Welcome to the Dibley Diaries for this week. This week we're going to be thinking about Jesus being baptised and the words that God says to him, that you are my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased. But preparing for this week, I've been thinking about how we welcome children into our church congregations and what that means for us. So theologically, it's really important that we remember that we are all God's children, and we'll think a bit more about this in Thought for the Week. But how do we practically make it simple for children to be part of our church congregations, our worshipping communities? There are all sorts of things that might make a difference, but I just wanted to talk about one experience that I've had of that. Now, I was really fortunate when I came here. I asked if I could have my licensing service on a weekend afternoon rather than in the middle of the week at 7:30 at night. And that was really radical, and it was only possible for me because I wasn't being licensed by a bishop, because I was being licensed by an archdeacon, and he was prepared to be flexible. And it meant that it was just so much easier for people with children to come and be part of that service, to show and be part of that congregation worshipping together. So we had the service in the afternoon. That was great. In the preparations for the service, somebody who was on the organising committee said to me, "What, you mean you're expecting that there will be children coming to this service?" And I said, "Well, I really hope so. And I would like to extend a really big thank you to the 5 or so families who did bring their children with them to that service, where they could manage it in the afternoon, but they would not have been able to manage it on a late weeknight evening when they had school the next day." So just think about what it is about the practicalities of what we do, which might exclude families with children or might include families with children into our worshipping community. This week on Thought for the Week, we're thinking about the baptism of Jesus, and we're also going to think a bit about the beginning of each of the Gospels and where the baptism of Jesus sits in that. So I think you probably, if you're familiar with the Bible, you'll know John begins with this great kind of cosmic introduction. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. You know that beginning. And then Matthew begins with the genealogy of Jesus, placing Jesus into the historical understanding of the story of God. Luke begins with an explanation about the reliability of the witnesses to Jesus' life, and begins with various things happening in the narrative, what happened around Jesus' birth, or those sorts of things. And then Mark begins with the baptism of Jesus. Mark begins with the baptism of Jesus. So in Luke, we hear the birth of John the Baptist and all that sort of stuff as well, because it's all an important part of what's happening in the story. But with Mark, you just begin with the baptism of Jesus when John and Jesus are already grown up. So in our passages that we have for today from Luke 3, we hear that Jesus is baptized by John. And then when Jesus comes out of the water, there's a voice from heaven, and the voice says, "This is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased." This is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased. Now, Jesus going to be baptised raises lots of really important theological questions anyway. If Jesus was sinless, why did he need to go and be baptised in the first place? Was it something to do with him having the whole of humanity, the whole human experience? Was that all part of what was going on for Jesus and John in that place? And sometimes we think about baptism being associated with the chaos of the water, which is a very strong ancient Near Eastern symbol cataclysm to do with water and death and chaos, and being lifted out of it into a new life. And was it all to do with that? But this week I've really been thinking about these words, that you are my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Some of you may have grown up in activist families where actually it seems that your parents are only going to be pleased when you've done their tick list. When you've achieved this or you've achieved that, you've done well at school, you've done well at this, you've done well at that, you've achieved this, you've earned this much money, you've managed to buy this sort of car. If you're from that sort of society, there are all sorts of things that might be required before you felt that your parents were pleased with you. Jesus, at this point in the Gospel, right at the beginning of the Gospels, has not done any of these things. He has not achieved his ministry smart objectives. He hasn't ticked his list at all. All we know is that he has, after the incident in the temple, he has been a good child for Mary and Joseph. He's been a carpenter, and that's it. And that's what we know. But God just says to him, you are my son, with whom I am well pleased. Now, we'll go back to the beginning of the other Gospels. What does it say in John 1? When John is explaining the whole cosmic reason behind why Jesus came in the first place. John said that we are being made children of God, that we may all be made children of God. So God says to us, you are my beloved child with whom I am well pleased. Before we've achieved anything, before we've done anything, before we've reached our goals or our ministry goals or our lifetime goals, before we've bought a house or before we've achieved this or before that, God is pleased that we are his children. Jesus' life is not about to become less chaotic. When Jesus comes out of the water, the symbolism of leaving chaos behind doesn't necessarily apply to Jesus. Things are going to be very difficult. And the same is often true for us. We might be going through a difficult or turbulent patch at the moment. Our lives may be changing. But it doesn't stop the fact that God is pleased with us. We are God's children, and God is pleased with us. And sometimes, that's all we need to know. The Dibley moment of the week this week is just a couple of little tales about my children in church when they were much younger. Occasionally I would have to take my younger child to a church service when my husband and my older child were away somewhere. Now, the drill was pretty the same. Snacks, iPad to play with, and sitting still somewhere quietly at the back, which was fine. One of the church buildings, which was much smaller, was not happy about the child being there at all. And in fact, one of the people in that congregation was really quite rude to my child. And it meant that the child no longer wanted to go there or be involved in part of what was going on in that community. And one of the other places where I was working was a much bigger church building, and same snacks, iPad rule applied, but also there was a sleeping bag, and the child would lie out along one of the pews in the sleeping bag and would be very, very well behaved, very quiet. The only time we'd kind of hear an occasional rustle from the sleeping bag, which was when we would know that we were there. But the congregation of that church service at the end of the service would be really, really nice to my child. They would say welcoming things, would say how well behaved they were. They would ask what they were doing to the service. They'd be genuinely interested in them. And my child preferred that church community. They felt welcome in that church community. They even, I would say, felt loved in that church community. So this is the challenge for us all. Are we going to accept our children in rustling sleeping bags with snacks? Are we going to tell them we are well pleased with them? Well, that's it for the Dibley Diaries for this week. I pray that you and your village, however large or small, are really blessed by God this week, and that you know that God is well pleased with you.